8 faces turn toward you, and the sentence you rehearsed 12 times disappears somewhere between your lungs and your teeth. This is a video about that specific failure, the blank that arrives at the exact moment speech matters most, and why your brain treats a sentence as something dangerous enough to hold back. Your boss has asked a simple question, and you know the answer. You knew it in the hallway. You knew it while someone else was still talking, and you had a clean opening, a sharp example, maybe even a small joke that would have made you look dangerously competent. Then your name gets called, your mouth opens, and nothing comes out. This is not poetic emptiness or peaceful mountaintop emptiness. What you are experiencing is fluorescent office emptiness, the kind where you become suddenly aware that you own a tongue but have apparently misplaced the instruction manual. Someone raises an eyebrow while your heartbeat kicks the inside of your ribs. A second passes, then another, and you finally produce a sentence that sounds as though it was translated from English into dolphin and back again. 3 hours later, the perfect answer returns while you are washing a spoon. Of course it does. The strange part is not that pressure makes speaking harder, because that much is obvious to anyone who has ever stood up in a room. What deserves explanation is the timing, because your brain tends to jam the brakes precisely when the stakes climb. The more you care about sounding clear, intelligent, funny, honest, persuasive, or simply not weird, the more likely your inner cave clerk is to stamp the entire sentence with a single verdict, which is that this one is too dangerous to release. Researchers built a wonderfully cruel way to study this, and they named it the Trier Social Stress Test. A person gets time to prepare a speech, delivers it in front of evaluators trained to offer almost no encouragement, and then faces mental arithmetic because apparently the speech alone was not enough and science wanted to add numbers to the bonfire. The test reliably produces measurable stress responses, which is how it became one of the standard laboratory tools for studying social stress. That detail matters more than it first appears. Scientists do not need a snake, a cliff, or a man with an axe to push the human stress system into gear, because 3 unsmiling people, a camera, and the phrase, "you may begin," accomplish a surprising amount of the work. Sally Dickerson and Margaret Kameny examined 208 laboratory studies of acute stress in a large meta-analysis, and the pattern that emerged was specific rather than general. The strongest cortisol responses tended to appear when 2 ingredients arrived together, the first being an outcome that was difficult to control, and the second being some valued part of the person that other people could sit there and judge. So here's the answer early. Before your working memory files a complaint, you usually do not go blank because the thought has vanished. You go blank because social evaluation changes the task itself. Part of your attention leaves the idea and begins monitoring for danger. Working memory loses space, and the speech system starts editing itself in real time. A skill that normally moves at conversational speed turns into a high-stakes inspection process. The thought may still be somewhere in the building, it simply cannot get through security. An experiment run in 2026 made all of this considerably more concrete. 80 graduate students, postdoctoral researchers, and faculty members prepared scientific presentations and delivered them to 2 virtual audiences, one of which behaved supportively while the other looked distracted and openly unfriendly. Those simulated listeners turned away, checked their phones, slouched, and generally behaved as though a conference room had been populated entirely by your least encouraging relatives. Facing the unsupportive audience, speakers reported more anxiety, more negative emotion, and greater cognitive and social effort, and their speaking rate slowed. Their heart rate, breathing rate, and pupil dilation, however, showed no reliable difference between the 2 conditions. That result is useful because it ruins the cartoon version of stress. Your nervous system is not one red bulb labeled panic, and your thoughts, voice, behavior, attention, heart, breathing, and movement do not always react in perfect formation. You can feel mentally jammed while several instruments in the body play a completely different song. Social evaluation is not decorative anxiety because it changes the actual work required to speak. All of that sounds melodramatic until you remember what kind of animal is doing the speaking. Humans are not solitary geniuses who occasionally meet for coffee. We are coalition animals. Across most of our species' history, access to food, protection, information, childcare, mating opportunities, and help during injury depended heavily on other people, which meant that reputation, trust, reciprocity, and belonging carried real weight. A damaged reputation was not merely a bad week on LinkedIn because it could shape who shared with you, believed you, defended you, followed you, or chose to stand nearby when something with teeth arrived. We should be careful here, though. Language does not fossilize, and archaeologists have never uncovered a Pleistocene performance review saying that Grog had strong ideas but poor delivery. Nobody can point to one ancient speaking incident and declare that it installed meeting anxiety into the human brain. What the evidence supports is broader and steadier than that. Humans are highly sensitive to rejection, exclusion, judgment, and threats to social standing, and research on ostracism shows that even brief exclusion can threaten belonging, self-esteem, control, and the sense that one matters. The precise evolutionary history remains debated, while the importance of staying accepted by other humans is a good deal less mysterious. Now place speech inside that system. Speaking is not just moving air through a face hole because it exposes information about you, including your knowledge, your confidence, your loyalties, your intentions, your emotional state, and your ability to read a room. A single sentence can recruit an ally, challenge a leader, reveal ignorance, repair a relationship, start a fight, end a negotiation, insult a cousin, or convince everyone present that you should never again be placed in charge of the fire. Silence hides you, while speech puts you on display. And that is why the moment before speaking turns into a risk assessment problem. Across the animal world, freezing is not simply doing nothing. It reduces movement while increasing the collection of information and preparing the body for whatever comes next. In one human experiment, angry faces were associated with reduced body sway and a slowing of the heart rate, a freeze-like pattern that resembles defensive responses studied in other animals. None of that means every awkward pause is a full animal freeze response, but it does mean social threat can produce bodily breaking rather than only frantic activation. A mouse hears something in the grass and stops moving. A deer catches a scent and becomes a lawn ornament with anxiety. Neither animal is holding a motivational seminar about confidence because both are buying time to answer one question about what happens if they move now. Your version of that calculation happens in a meeting where the danger is not teeth but exposure. Stress also changes which systems in the brain receive priority. Amy Arnstein's work on the prefrontal cortex shows how acute, uncontrollable stress rapidly weakens the networks behind working memory, flexible thinking, top-down attention, and goal-directed behavior. Her research is not a direct experiment on forgetting a sentence during a weekly planning call, and much of it examines the underlying neurobiology of stress instead. What it offers is a credible mechanism for what the speaker actually experiences. Because the abilities stress weakens are exactly the abilities required to turn a half-formed idea into a clean sentence while adapting to another person's face in real time. Working memory is the small mental workbench where you hold the beginning of the sentence, the point you are making, the wording you already rejected, the reaction of the listener, and the social consequence of accidentally saying, "your mother," instead of "our manager." It is not a warehouse, it is a folding table. Pressure walks in and starts placing extra objects on that table, including how you are standing, whether the pause ran too long, why she is looking at you like that, whether your voice cracked, and whether the room already disagrees. Your actual point now sits under 6 boxes of self-consciousness and 1 live chicken. Research on choking under pressure fits this pattern, though it needs one honest qualification. In demanding math tasks, people who normally lean heavily on working memory have sometimes shown larger performance drops under pressure, and the interpretation is that worry consumes the very executive resources supporting their usual advantage. That does not prove intelligent people freeze more often in meetings because math is not speech. A laboratory pressure manipulation is not your boss, and working memory capacity is not a personality type. What it does show is that ability grants no immunity to interference, and that sometimes the resources helping you perform well are the first ones. Pressure starts eating. Here's the reversal. You do not freeze because you have nothing to say. You freeze because for a few seconds your brain rates saying the wrong thing as more dangerous than saying nothing at all. That is why the blank so often arrives after the idea was already formed. The thought existed, the social stakes changed, and the brain stopped acting like a writer and started acting like a security department. Security departments are not famous for improv. This also explains why people who care deeply about precision get trapped so easily. They are not empty, they are crowded. Someone in that position may be holding 3 possible openings, 2 objections, the memory of a previous embarrassment, an estimate of the audience's mood, and a simulation of how each sentence could be misread. Meanwhile, the brain keeps running its checks, asking whether the statement is true, whether it is useful, whether it is safe, whether it lowers your status, whether it angers anyone, whether it sounds arrogant, whether it sounds stupid, and whether it sounds like you are trying not to sound stupid, which somehow sounds even more stupid. The speech system waits at the gate with valid paperwork, while the threat system keeps asking for one more form. Self-focused attention pulls that trap tighter. When you speak comfortably, most of your attention points outward toward the person, the problem, the story, or the idea, and your mind is simply trying to communicate. When you freeze, attention folds inward instead. You start watching yourself speak before you have spoken. You hear your own voice through an imaginary microphone. You inspect your face from across the room, and you predict how the next word will land. In that state, you become the speaker, the audience, the critic, the camera operator, and the person already drafting the apology email. In a 2021 experiment, 57 adolescents completed conversations under 2 different conditions. One group received instructions to focus on themselves and use common protective behaviors, monitoring how they were coming across, checking whether each thing was good enough to say, and carefully managing the interaction. The other group received the opposite instruction, focusing outward, responding naturally, and dropping those behaviors entirely. Anxiety rose and performance ratings dropped in the self-focus condition, and that happened in both the higher anxiety and lower anxiety groups. The study involved adolescents rather than executives, and it bundled self-focus together with safety behaviors, so it cannot tell us exactly which ingredient did how much damage. It still demonstrates something worth holding on to, which is that the strategies used to prevent embarrassment help manufacture the strained performance the speaker fears. Protective habits feel sensible in the moment. Rehearse every sentence internally, avoid eye contact, speak as little as possible, monitor every movement, and wait until the wording is perfect. Each safety check, though, treats speaking as dangerous enough to require another safety check, and the next speaking moment arrives carrying a larger warning label. None of this requires a formal anxiety disorder. A confident person freezes when the audience matters enough, and a quick thinker goes blank during a proposal, a confession, a confrontation, a wedding toast, or the one classroom question they actually prepared for. The common thread is not crowd size, it is consequence. You may speak easily to 50 strangers and then freeze in front of one person whose opinion can rearrange your life. You may joke your way through an entire presentation and then lose language when someone asks whether you are happy with them. You may explain a complex idea to friends without effort and then become a malfunctioning cave flute the moment a senior colleague says, "Go ahead, we're listening." Your body is tracking social risk, not seating capacity. Status shifts the perceived price of an error too. The chief executive feels free to interrupt, ramble, correct herself, or say, "Let me think out loud," while the intern suspects that thinking out loud is a paid feature. That is not a biological law declaring every executive calm and every intern terrified, because power does not remove anxiety and hierarchy varies wildly from room to room. Permission, security, authority, and the expected cost of a mistake all change how dangerous speech feels. When a person believes one bad sentence could confirm a stereotype, expose inexperience, anger a volatile authority figure, or threaten belonging, silence starts to look like the cheaper gamble. The protective system is trying to prevent social damage. It just has poor knowledge of office policy. That mismatch is where we live now. A defensive system tuned to faces, rank, uncertainty, and judgment now operates in classrooms, interviews, live streams, video calls, first dates, group chats, family dinners, and offices where one aunt somehow functions as an entire review board. The judgment is not imaginary either because modern speech affects employment, relationships, grades, income, reputation, and belonging. Modern speech is also recordable, replayable, searchable, forwardable, and fully capable of being rediscovered during your future political campaign. A sentence once disappeared into the air, and now it becomes a screenshot. No wonder the cave clerk is overworked. This framework also helps explain why the perfect reply shows up hours later. Nobody has yet built the spoon-washing social recovery test, so the delayed return moment is an inference rather than a finding. But the mechanism fits neatly. Once the audience is gone, the immediate evaluation ends. Attention returns to the idea instead of the imagined image of the self, and working memory has far fewer social predictions to hold. The security department clocks out. The writer strolls back in carrying the sentence you needed at 2:17 in the afternoon, and at 11:40 that night, your brain announces that it has found it. Excellent service. There is a second route to the same outward failure, because pressure does more than distract you. It makes you control an automatic skill too consciously. Speech normally gets assembled at astonishing speed, and you do not individually select each tongue movement as though entering a password, since years of practice handle most of the process outside deliberate awareness. Pressure makes you inspect the machinery anyway. Place the tongue here. Control the voice. Do not say, Maintain eye contact without drifting into serial killer eye contact, and smile, but not while discussing layoffs. An automatic skill is now being micromanaged by a committee. Choking research separates these two routes cleanly. In working memory-heavy tasks, pressure distracts you with worries and consequences, while in highly practiced skills, pressure drags automatic procedures back under conscious supervision. One route steals attention from the task, the other hands the machinery an unnecessary manager. Speech contains both problems at once, since you need working memory to choose and organize the message while relying on automatic processes to produce fluent language. So you can lose the thought and over-control the mouth meant to express it in the same 3 seconds, which is why commanding yourself to speak perfectly backfires. Perfection adds one more observer inside the skull. This also explains why reading a prepared line feels easier than creating one under scrutiny. The content has already been chosen. Fewer branches remain open, and the brain no longer has to generate, judge, edit, predict, and perform in the same instant. A first sentence works like a stone placed across a stream, and once your foot lands, movement gets easier. That is not a miracle trick, it is a change in task design. Instead of demanding that you say the whole intelligent thing right now, give the brain one small physical action, which is to say the first plain sentence. Something like, I think the main problem is timing, or I disagree with one part, or I need a second to put this clearly, or that hurt me more than I expected. None of those lines wins a prize, and that is exactly why they work, because they move speech out of internal simulation and into the room. Attention can then follow the message outward. Choose one person, one fact, or one purpose to aim at. The question guiding you should not be how you are doing, it should be what this person needs to understand next. External focus is not a command to stop feeling anxious. It is a decision about where the limited attention that remains gets spent. Preparation helps most when it resembles the moment that scares you. Silent rehearsal creates an illusion of fluency because the imaginary audience is extremely polite. Speaking aloud adds breath, timing, sound, and motor movement. Recording yourself adds a camera. Speaking to one trusted person adds evaluation. And speaking to a small group adds competing faces. Exposure-based approaches to public speaking anxiety run on this general principle, which is practicing gradually in conditions that let the person experience the feared situation without escaping every time anxiety shows up. None of that means throwing yourself repeatedly into the most terrifying room available and hoping the nervous system becomes inspirational. Difficulty should climb in manageable steps. The purpose is not proving that you will never feel arousal, it is gathering evidence that speech continues while arousal is present. A pause is not proof that the system has failed. It may be the brain running a threat check, retrieving the point, or reorganizing the sentence. Fighting that pause with panic simply adds a second threat, and now you are afraid of the silence and afraid that everyone can see you being afraid of the silence. 2 seconds feels enormous from inside your own body, while to everyone else it usually just looks like thinking. You are allowed to look like you are thinking, which remains one of the few suspicious activities still permitted in meetings. There is an honest limit to this explanation, because not every speech block comes from the same source. Fatigue, second language load, trauma, panic, attention problems, medication effects, speech disorders, and neurological conditions all affect speaking, and a recurring, severe, or worsening problem deserves more than a clever evolutionary story. This model describes one common pattern, where the idea is available before the social moment, access collapses when evaluation becomes immediate, and the idea returns after the pressure has passed. Evolutionary explanations turn into lazy fairy tales when every modern discomfort gets assigned to one dramatic campfire. The evidence cannot tell us that a specific ancestor survived because he paused before giving a mammoth update. What it can tell us is far more grounded. Social evaluation produces a strong stress response. Social threat cues produce freeze-like bodily patterns. Acute, uncontrollable stress weakens prefrontal functions involved in working memory and flexible control. Pressure either distracts performance or makes a person over-control an automatic skill. Self-focused attention and protective behavior increase anxiety and worsen social performance. Unsupportive audience behavior increases cognitive effort and slows speech even when the physiological measures stay flat. Put those findings side by side, and the blank mind stops looking mysterious. What you are watching is a collision between communication and protection, where one system wants to reveal the thought and another wants to prevent a costly mistake. Both are trying to help you, and the tragedy is entirely in the timing. Your warning system was never built to wait for a committee report confirming that the danger is real, because warning systems survive by acting before certainty arrives. A smoke alarm that waits for proof is just a decorative ceiling circle. So your alarm rings for burnt toast or a raised eyebrow or the sentence, wailed, "Do you have anything to add?" That does not make you weak, it makes you the owner of a nervous system with a false positive problem. The solution is not to hate the alarm, because shame only adds more social threat to a system already drowning in it. The better move is to recognize what happened, shrink the size of the first action, point attention back toward the message, and give the body repeated evidence that imperfect speech does not end in exile. 8 faces turn toward you. The old system pulls the brake, your lungs tighten, your workbench tips, and the sentence hides behind your ribs. It is not necessarily gone, no. It may be waiting for enough space to move, waiting for proof that the room is not a cliff, that the listeners are not predators, and that one imperfect sentence will not erase your place beside the fire. Tell me which one is worse for you, speaking first, or waiting so long that someone else says the exact thing you were thinking. If you want to keep understanding why your brain and body do things that make no sense in the modern world, subscribe, because we have got a lot more of this coming.